The sound of the auctioneer's gavel rang through the dusty air of Austin, Texas, as Vivian Foster clutched her sister's 3 children close to her, their small hands trembling within her own. It was 1875, and Vivian never imagined she'd find herself on an auction block, treated like property rather than a human being with a beating heart and dreams of her own. Next up, a woman and 3 youngsters, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying across the crowd gathered in the town square. The woman's got good teeth, strong back, can cook and clean. Children come with her package deal, folks. Vivian swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust as she stood tall, refusing to let her fear show. At 24, she had promised her dying sister she would protect 7-year-old Thomas, 5-year-old Elizabeth, and 3-year-old James with her last breath. The bank had seized their modest homestead after her sister and brother-in-law succumbed to fever just weeks apart. With nowhere to go and no money to her name, Vivian and the children had been rounded up as vagrants and placed in the custody of the town marshal, who saw fit to auction them off as indentured servants. Starting bid is $50 for all 4, the auctioneer called out. The crowd murmured, and a few men raised their hands half-heartedly. $60, called a portly man with yellowed teeth and beady eyes. $75, countered another, leering at Vivian in a way that made her blood run cold. Little Elizabeth whimpered, burying her face in Vivian's skirts. "Don't worry, little one," Vivian whispered, though her own heart raced with uncertainty. "We'll stay together, I promise." As the bidding continued, Vivian scanned the crowd, noting the types of men who were interested in purchasing them. Most looked like they needed farmhands or household servants. Some looked worse, much worse. $200, a new voice called out, silencing the crowd. Vivian's gaze snapped toward the source, a tall man standing at the back of the gathering. Unlike the others, he stood straight-backed, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. His clothing, though dusty from the trail, was of good quality, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. "200 from Mr. Reeves. Do I hear 250? Another bidder raised his hand reluctantly. 250. 300, the stranger Mr. Reeves countered without hesitation. The bidding escalated quickly, with Mr. Reeves matching and exceeding each offer without so much as a flinch. When the price reached $500, most bidders dropped out, shaking their heads at the exorbitant sum. Only one opponent remained, a rancher known for his cruelty to workers. $550, he growled. $1,000, Mr. Reeves stated firmly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer nearly dropped his gavel in shock. $1,000, he repeated. That's more than a prime bull brings at market, sir." "You heard me," Mr. Reeves replied, stepping forward so Vivian could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, but it did little to diminish his handsome features. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer paused, looking around the silent crowd. "Sold to Mr. Mason Reeves for $1,000. Vivian clutched the children closer as Mason Reeves approached, her heart pounding in her chest. What kind of man would pay such an astronomical sum? What would he expect in return, madam? He said, tipping his hat as he stopped before them. His voice was deep but gentle. "My name is Mason Reeves. I own the Double R Ranch about 15 miles north of town." Vivian lifted her chin, determined to show strength. "I'm Vivian Foster. These are my sister's children, Thomas, Elizabeth, and James." Mason nodded, his expression unreadable. "The wagon's this way," he said simply, gesturing toward the end of the street where a well-built wagon waited, hitched to two sturdy horses. With no choice but to follow, Vivian guided the children after him, whispering reassurances, though her own future had never felt more uncertain. As they reached the wagon, Mason turned to her. "I know you have no reason to trust me, Miss Foster, but I want you to know that you and the children will be safe at my ranch. You have my word." "Your word means little to me, Mr. Reeves," Vivian replied honestly. "I've seen how men's promises fare in this world." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "That's fair enough. Actions speak louder than words, and I intend to let mine do the talking." He helped the children into the wagon bed, where blankets had been arranged to make a comfortable seat. "There's food in that basket if the little ones are hungry." The mention of food made Vivian realize how long it had been since any of them had eaten properly. The children's eyes lit up, but they looked to her for permission. "Go ahead," she said softly, and they eagerly opened the basket to find fresh bread, cheese, and apples. Mason extended a hand to help Vivian onto the wagon seat. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it, noticing the calluses that spoke of hard work despite his evident wealth. As the wagon pulled away from Austin, heading north toward rolling hills covered in bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, Vivian kept her eyes forward, refusing to look back at the town that had treated them with such cruelty. "May I ask why?" she said finally, breaking the silence between them. "Why spend such a sum on strangers?" Mason kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "My reasons are my own, Miss Foster. If I'm to be your servant, I believe I deserve to know what will be expected of me," Vivian pressed, her voice steady despite her fear. Mason glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. "Servant? No, Miss Foster, I didn't buy you to be my servant." Vivian stiffened. "Then what exactly did you buy me for, Mr. Reeves?" "I didn't buy you at all," he replied, his voice quieter now. "I paid that money to give you your freedom. You and the children aren't my property, nor will you ever be." Vivian stared at him, disbelief warring with a fragile hope. "I don't understand," Mason sighed, adjusting his grip on the reins. "My ranch needs help, it's true. I could use someone to manage the household, and in time, perhaps the boys might learn ranching if they take to it. But you'll be paid fair wages for fair work, with a roof over your heads and food on your table." He paused. "You're free to leave whenever you wish, though I'd ask you to give me notice so I can arrange transportation back to town or wherever you'd like to go." Vivian felt tears threatening to spill. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to show such vulnerability. "Why would you do this?" $1,000 is a fortune." "It's just money, Miss Foster," Mason replied. "Some things are worth more." They traveled in silence after that, the children's occasional questions or exclamations the only conversation. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and Mason pointed to a sprawling ranch nestled in the valley below. "Welcome to the Double R," he said. The ranch was larger than Vivian had imagined, a substantial main house built of sturdy timber, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and cattle grazing on the surrounding grasslands. A stream wound through the property, and a windmill turned lazily in the breeze. As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch, gray-haired, with a kind face creased by years in the Texas sun. "That's Mrs. Wilkins," Mason explained. "She's been my housekeeper since I established the ranch 5 years ago. She comes in from town 3 days a week, but doesn't live on the property." The wagon rolled to a stop, and Mrs. Wilkins came forward, her expression curious but welcoming. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Miss Vivian Foster and her niece and nephews Elizabeth, Thomas, and James," Mason introduced them. "They'll be staying with us. Miss Foster will be taking over household management." Mrs. Wilkins smiled warmly. "It's about time this place had a proper lady of the house." These children look like they could use some of my apple pie." The children perked up at the mention of pie, and even Vivian felt her spirits lift slightly. "Miss Foster and the children will be taking the east wing," Mason instructed. "Would you show them to their rooms while I see to the horses?" "Of course, Mr. Reeves." "Come along, dears, Mrs." Wilkins beckoned, and the children followed eagerly, their earlier fear seemingly forgotten in the promise of pie and adventure. Vivian hesitated, looking at Mason. "Mr. Reeves, I don't know how to thank you." Mason shook his head. "No thanks needed, Miss Foster. We all deserve a chance at a new beginning." With that, he led the horses toward the barn, leaving Vivian to follow Mrs. Wilkins into what would be their new home. The east wing of the house contained 4 bedrooms, one for Vivian and one for each child, along with a small sitting room. The furnishings were simple but comfortable, and everything was impeccably clean. "Mr. Reeves had me prepare these rooms last week," Mrs. Wilkins explained as she showed Vivian around. "Said he was expecting guests who might be staying a while." Vivian frowned. "He knew about us before today." Mrs. Wilkins shrugged. "He didn't say much, just asked me to make sure everything was ready for a lady and 3 children." After Mrs. Wilkins left to serve the promised pie, Vivian sat on the edge of her bed, trying to make sense of the day's events. Had Mason Reeves planned this? How could he have known about their situation? That evening they gathered in the dining room for a simple but hearty meal. Mason sat at the head of the table, with Vivian at the other end and the children between them. 2 ranch hands, Pablo and Caleb, joined them, treating the newcomers with respectful curiosity. "Mr. Pablo has horses," Thomas announced excitedly. "He said he might teach me to ride." "Only if your aunt permits it," Pablo clarified quickly, glancing at Vivian. "We'll see," Vivian replied, not wanting to dampen Thomas's enthusiasm but concerned about safety. "The children should learn to ride," Mason said. "It's necessary out here, but we'll start them on gentle mounts with proper supervision." As the meal progressed, Vivian observed Mason with the children. He answered their endless questions patiently, neither talking down to them nor dismissing their curiosity. Even little James, normally shy with strangers, seemed drawn to the rancher's calm presence. After dinner, when the children had been tucked into their new beds, Vivian found Mason on the porch, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars that blanketed the Texas sky. "They're asleep," she said, stepping out to join him. "It's been an overwhelming day for them." Mason nodded. "They seem like good children." "They are. They've been through more than any child should have to endure." Vivian wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Mr. Reeves, there's something I need to ask you." "Mason," he corrected. "Please call me Mason." "Mason, then. Mrs. Wilkins mentioned you prepared for our arrival a week ago. How did you know about us?" Mason tapped his pipe against the porch railing, considering his answer. "I was in Austin on business last month when I overheard the marshal discussing your situation with the bank manager. They were deciding what to do with you and the children after foreclosing on your property." Vivian felt a surge of anger at the casual way these men had discussed their fate. "So you decided to, what, rescue us?" "I decided to offer you an opportunity," Mason replied. "The same kind someone once offered me when I had nothing." "What do you mean?" Mason was quiet for a long moment. "When I was 19, I was falsely accused of theft in Missouri. A rancher named Theodore Reeves believed in my innocence when no one else did. He paid my bail, gave me work, taught me everything he knew about ranching." His voice softened with memory. "When he died 3 years later, he left the ranch to me, along with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. I came to Texas, established the Double R, and promised myself I'd honor his legacy by extending the same kindness to others when the opportunity arose." You took his name, Vivian observed. Mason nodded. My birth name was Miller. Theodore was more of a father to me than my own ever was. Taking his name seemed the right way to honor him. Vivian absorbed this information, seeing Mason in a new light. Still, $1,000 is an extraordinary sum. It was everything I had in ready cash, Mason admitted. But I couldn't stand by and watch what was happening to you and those children, not when I had the means to help. The confession stunned Vivian into silence. Everything he had. For strangers. Why tell me this? She asked finally. Because you deserve the truth, Mason replied. And because I want you to understand that, while you owe me nothing, this ranch is now your home for as long as you wish it to be. Vivian studied his profile in the moonlight, trying to reconcile this man with her experience of the world. In her 24 years, she had learned that kindness rarely came without conditions, especially from men. Thank you for your honesty, she said at last. Good night, Mason. Good night, Vivian, he replied softly. As she returned to her room, Vivian found herself wondering about the enigmatic rancher who had changed their fortunes so dramatically. Only time would tell if his generosity was truly as selfless as it appeared. The next few weeks established a routine at the Double R Ranch. Vivian took charge of the household management, working alongside Mrs. Wilkins until she understood the rhythms of ranch life. The children adapted quickly, Thomas following Pablo and Caleb around like a shadow, Elizabeth helping in the kitchen, and little James toddling after anyone who would tolerate his company. Mason was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working with the cattle or horses, meeting with neighboring ranchers, or handling business in town. When he was present, he was unfailingly courteous to Vivian and kind to the children, but maintained a certain distance that both relieved and, oddly, disappointed her. One morning, about a month after their arrival, Vivian was hanging laundry when she heard a commotion from the corral. She hurried around the house to find Mason leading a small, dappled pony while Thomas watched with undisguised longing. "Is that for me, Mr. Mason?" the boy asked, bouncing on his toes. "It's for all of you," Mason replied, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "This is Pepper. She's gentle enough for James to ride with help, but spirited enough that you won't outgrow her too quickly, Thomas." Elizabeth approached cautiously, reaching out to stroke the pony's soft nose. "She's beautiful," she whispered. Vivian watched from a distance, her heart swelling at the joy on the children's faces. This was another expense Mason had taken on for their benefit, another kindness she couldn't quite fathom. Mason spotted her and handed the pony's lead to Pablo. "Would you mind showing the children how to groom her?" he asked before walking over to join Vivian. "You didn't have to do that," she said as he approached. "I wanted to." Mason watched the children circle the pony, their excitement palpable. Every child on a ranch should have a horse to love. "You're spoiling them," Vivian observed, though her tone held no reproach. "Perhaps," Mason acknowledged with a slight smile, "but they deserve some spoiling after what they've been through." Vivian couldn't argue with that. "Thank you. Their happiness means everything to me." Mason's expression softened. "I know. Your devotion to them is admirable, Vivian." Their eyes met, and Vivian felt an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. She looked away first, suddenly flustered. "I should get back to the laundry." "Of course," Mason said. "Though I was hoping you might join me for a ride this afternoon. There's a part of the property I'd like to show you." Vivian hesitated. She hadn't been on a horse in years. "I'm not much of a rider." "We'll take it slow," Mason assured her, "and I think you'll find it worth the journey." Curiosity won out. "All right." After the midday meal, Mason nodded, tipping his hat before rejoining the children and their new pony. That afternoon, Vivian found herself astride a gentle mare named Willow, following Mason along a winding trail that led into the hills above the ranch. Though anxious at first, she soon remembered the rhythm of riding, the connection between horse and rider that had once brought her such joy. They rode in comfortable silence, the landscape opening around them, rolling grasslands dotted with oak and mesquite trees, wildflowers carpeting the earth in vibrant hues. After about an hour, they crested a ridge, and Mason reined his horse to a stop. "This is what I wanted you to see," he said, gesturing to the view. Vivian gasped softly. Below them lay a small, hidden valley, sheltered by hills on three sides and bisected by a clear stream. A stand of cottonwood trees provided shade near the water, and the valley floor was lush with grass and flowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's the heart of the Double R," Mason explained. "The water never runs dry, even in the worst droughts. Theodore showed me this place when I first came to the ranch. He called it Promise Valley." Vivian glanced at him. "Why Promise Valley?" He said it was a promise that no matter how harsh the world might seem, there were always places of beauty and peace to be found. Mason's voice held reverence for the memory. "When things get difficult, I come here to remember that." They dismounted and let the horses drink from the stream while they sat beneath a cottonwood tree. Mason produced a small bundle from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, and dried fruit, which they shared as the afternoon sun filtered through the leaves above. "May I ask you something personal?" Mason ventured after they had eaten. Vivian nodded, curious. "What happened to your sister and her husband?" "The children never speak of them." Vivian's expression grew somber. "Sarah was my younger sister. She married Robert when she was 18. He was a good man, a carpenter by trade. They built a small homestead outside Austin and were happy there." She traced patterns in the grass beside her. "Last winter, an influenza outbreak swept through the area. Robert fell ill first, then Sarah as they cared for him. I came to help with the children, but—" Her voice faltered. Mason waited patiently for her to continue. "Robert died first. Sarah fought harder for the children's sake, but she was too weakened. Before she passed, she made me promise to keep them together, to protect them." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes. "I tried. We managed for a few months on what little savings they had. But then the bank claimed the property for outstanding loans Robert had taken to expand his workshop. With no home and no income, we were destitute. And the marshal decided to auction you as indentured servants rather than offer assistance," Mason concluded, his jaw tightening with anger. "Such is the way of the world," Vivian said softly. "Or at least, I thought it was until you appeared." Mason reached across the space between them, hesitantly covering her hand with his own. "Not everyone turns away from others' suffering, Vivian." The simple touch sent a current of awareness through her. Vivian looked up, finding Mason's eyes on hers, their blue depths reflecting something that made her heart race. For a moment, she thought he might lean closer, but instead he withdrew his hand and stood. "We should head back before the children worry," he said, offering a hand to help her up. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them lost in thoughts they weren't ready to share. By the time they returned, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. That night, after the children were asleep, Vivian stood by her bedroom window, gazing at the stars and reflecting on the day. Something was changing between her and Mason, something tentative and fragile, but undeniably there. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. For the first time since arriving at the Double R, Vivian allowed herself to imagine a future here, not just as a temporary refuge, but as home. 2 months after their arrival at the Double R ranch, disaster struck. Vivian was teaching Elizabeth how to make bread when Thomas burst into the kitchen, his face pale with fear. "Aunt Vivian, James fell into the creek behind the barn. Caleb pulled him out, but he's not waking up. Vivian's heart stopped. She ran outside, her flour-covered hands leaving white prints on the doorframe. Caleb was rushing toward the house, a limp James cradled in his arms, water streaming from both of them. "He's breathing," Caleb gasped as he reached her, "but he swallowed a lot of water." Vivian took James from him, her mind racing with fear as she carried him inside. The boy's skin was cold, his lips tinged blue. "Thomas, run and find Mason. Elizabeth, get blankets, as many as you can carry." As the children scattered to obey, Vivian laid James on the kitchen table and began stripping off his wet clothes. She turned him onto his side, patting his back firmly until water dribbled from his mouth. His breathing was shallow and ragged. Mrs. Wilkins appeared beside her with dry towels. Together, they rubbed James's small limbs, trying to restore circulation and warmth. "That's it, little one," Mrs. Wilkins murmured encouragingly as James coughed weakly. "Bring it all up." Elizabeth returned with an armload of blankets, her eyes wide with fear. They wrapped James tightly, continuing to rub his arms and legs through the layers. The sound of boots pounding on the porch heralded Mason's arrival. He burst through the door with Thomas at his heels, his face tight with concern. "How is he?" he asked, crossing to the table in 2 long strides. "He's breathing, but he's too cold," Vivian replied, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. Mason placed a large, warm hand on James's forehead. "We need to get him to the fireplace in the sitting room. It's the warmest place in the house." He scooped up the bundled child and carried him to the sitting room, where a fire was already burning. Kneeling before the hearth, Mason held James close to his chest, sharing his body heat while Vivian and Mrs. Wilkins built up the fire. "What happened?" Mason asked Thomas, who hovered anxiously nearby. "We were playing by the creek," Thomas admitted, his voice small with guilt. "I told him to stay away from the edge, but he saw a frog and leaned too far over. I tried to grab him, but he fell in. The current took him downstream before I could reach him." "It's not your fault, Thomas," Mason assured him. "Accidents happen. You did the right thing by getting help quickly." James stirred in Mason's arms, his eyelids fluttering. "Mama," he whimpered. "It's Mason and your Aunt Vivian," Mason said gently. "You're safe now." Vivian knelt beside them, stroking James's damp hair back from his forehead. "James, can you look at me?" The boy's eyes opened fully, confusion giving way to recognition. "Aunt Viv, my throat hurts." "I know, darling," Vivian murmured, relief washing through her. "You swallowed some creek water, but you're going to be fine." Mason shifted James into Vivian's arms. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, standing. "Is that necessary?" Vivian asked, concerned about the 15-mile journey to Austin. "He seems to be improving." "Water in the lungs can cause complications later," Mason explained. "I'd rather have the doctor check him to be safe." Vivian nodded, gratitude welling up inside her. "Thank you." Mason squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before striding from the room. Minutes later, they heard hoofbeats as he galloped toward town. The next few hours were anxious ones. Mrs. Wilkins prepared chicken broth for James, who managed a few spoonfuls before drifting into an exhausted sleep in Vivian's arms. Thomas and Elizabeth refused to leave their brother's side, maintaining a silent vigil from the hearth rug. As evening fell, James developed a fever. Vivian bathed his face and neck with cool water, murmuring prayers under her breath. The children finally succumbed to sleep, curled together on the large sofa nearby. It was well past midnight when Mason returned with the doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Sullivan with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined James thoroughly, listening to his chest and checking his temperature. The fever is his body's way of fighting off infection, Dr. Sullivan explained. He's a strong lad and his lungs sound clear, which is a good sign. Keep him warm, make sure he drinks plenty of fluids, and watch for any worsening of symptoms. I'll leave some medicine to ease his cough and help him sleep. After the doctor departed, Mason insisted that Vivian get some rest while he watched over James. "You've been sitting in the same position for hours," he pointed out. "At least lie down on the sofa for a while." Too exhausted to argue, Vivian reluctantly relinquished James to Mason's care and settled on the sofa beside the sleeping older children. Despite her intention to just rest briefly, she fell into a deep sleep. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows. James was still asleep, but now he was curled against Mason's chest, his breathing even and deep. Mason himself was dozing in the armchair, one arm protectively around the child. The sight brought tears to Vivian's eyes. In that moment, Mason Reeves looked for all the world like a father watching over his son. The tenderness in his expression, even in sleep, spoke of a depth of caring that went beyond mere responsibility or duty. As if sensing her gaze, Mason's eyes opened. He smiled tiredly at her. "His fever broke about an hour ago," he whispered, careful not to wake the child in his arms. Vivian moved to kneel beside the chair, gently placing a hand on James's forehead. The skin was cool and dry. "Thank God," she breathed. "He's going to be fine," Mason assured her. "Though I suspect we'll need to teach all the children to swim once he's recovered." "That would be wise," Vivian agreed. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed a lock of hair from Mason's forehead. "Thank you for everything you did yesterday." Mason caught her hand as she withdrew it, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "You don't need to thank me, Vivian. These children are as precious to me as they are to you." The simple statement and tender gesture broke something open inside her. Tears spilled down Vivian's cheeks, tears of relief, exhaustion, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Mason released her hand to wipe away a tear with his thumb. "Don't cry," he whispered. "Everything's all right now." "I know," Vivian said, trying to smile through her tears. "It's just, for so long I've carried this burden alone. The responsibility of keeping them safe, of being everything they need. And then yesterday, when James fell in the creek, I realized how easily I could fail them." "You haven't failed them," Mason said firmly. "You're the reason they are alive and together." "But Vivian, you don't have to carry this burden alone anymore. I'm here. We all are Mrs. Wilkins, Pablo Caleb. You have a family now. Family." The word resonated in Vivian's heart. Yes, that's what the double R had become to her, to all of them. A family. "I'm beginning to understand that," she admitted softly. Their gazes held, and in Mason's eyes, Vivian saw a reflection of her own growing feelings, a tenderness that had been building day by day, moment by moment. James stirred between them, breaking the moment. "I'm hungry," he announced, his voice raspy but strong. Vivian and Mason exchanged smiles, the unspoken understanding between them shelved for now but not forgotten. "Then we should feed you," Vivian said, taking James into her arms. "How does porridge with honey sound? With cinnamon too?" James asked hopefully. "With cinnamon too," she confirmed, carrying him toward the kitchen as Mason roused the other children. As they ate breakfast together, Mason at the head of the table, Vivian at the foot, the children between them, Vivian felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had always wanted but never dared hope for, not just survival but belonging. In the weeks following James's accident, life at the Double R settled into a new pattern. True to his word, Mason began teaching the children to swim in a shallow, calm section of the creek. Vivian joined these lessons, rediscovering the joy of cool water on a hot Texas day. The incident had changed something fundamental in her relationship with Mason. The walls of formality between them had crumbled, replaced by an easy companionship and growing affection. They often found themselves talking late into the evening after the children were asleep about books they had read, places they hoped to see, dreams they still harbored. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch swing watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in vibrant oranges and purples. The air was heavy with the scent of late blooming wildflowers, and cicadas hummed in the gathering dusk. "I received a letter from Jerome Sullivan today," Mason said, referring to a cattle buyer from San Antonio. "He's offering a good price for 50 head delivered next month." "Will you accept?" Vivian asked, gently pushing the swing with her foot. "I'm considering it. The extra money would allow us to expand the north pasture before winter." Mason glanced at her. "What do you think?" The casual way he included her in ranch decisions still surprised Vivian, though it shouldn't have by now. Over the past months, she had become not just the household manager but Mason's trusted advisor in many matters. "I think it's a good opportunity," she replied after considering. "The cattle are healthy, and prices are likely to drop once more ranches bring their herds to market." Mason nodded, satisfied with her assessment. A comfortable silence fell between them as the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon. "I've been thinking," Mason said finally, his voice thoughtful. "The children should be getting some formal education." Vivian turned to look at him. "I've been teaching them their letters and numbers, but you're right. They need more. Austin has a good school, but it's too far for daily travel." Mason's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of the swing. "What if we hired a teacher to live here at the ranch? Someone who could provide a proper education for Thomas, Elizabeth, and eventually James." "That would be wonderful," Vivian said, touched by his continued commitment to the children's welfare. "But finding someone willing to come out this far from town—" "I've already made inquiries," Mason admitted. "There's a young woman from Boston who recently arrived in Austin, Miss Abernathy. She came west hoping to teach but found the town school already fully staffed. The marshal's wife mentioned her to me when I was in town last week." "You've given this a lot of thought," Vivian observed. Mason nodded. "Education was important to Theodore. He taught me that knowledge opens doors that might otherwise remain closed. I want the same opportunities for our children. The casual possessive made Vivian's heart skip. Though Mason had from the beginning treated the children as if they were his own, this was the first time he had verbally claimed them as such. "I think it's an excellent idea," she said softly. "When might Miss Abernathy be available?" "I've invited her to visit next week to see if she thinks she could be happy here." Mason turned to face Vivian fully, his expression earnest. "I wanted to discuss it with you before finalizing anything. After all, you're the children's guardian. The decision should be yours." Vivian reached across the space between them to take his hand. "The decision should be ours, Mason. As you said, there are children now." The smile that spread across Mason's face was like sunrise breaking over the hills. Without a word, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. They stayed like that, hands entwined, until the first stars appeared in the night sky. Miss Caroline Abernathy arrived at the Double R the following week, a petite woman in her mid-20s, with intelligent brown eyes, and a quiet confidence that immediately impressed Vivian. She had graduated from a women's college in Massachusetts and had come west seeking adventure as much as employment. "My father was scandalized," she confided to Vivian, as they showed her the room that would become the schoolroom if she accepted the position. "He wanted me to marry the minister's son and settle into a proper Boston life. I wanted to see more of the world." "And what do you think of Texas so far?" Vivian asked, amused by the woman's forthright manner. "It's wilder than I imagined," Caroline admitted. "But there's something exhilarating about that wildness, a sense that anything is possible here." The children took to Miss Abernathy immediately. She had brought books with illustrations of far-off places and creatures they had never seen. By the end of her 2-day visit, all three were begging her to stay. "Please say you will, Miss Abernathy," Elizabeth pleaded. "I want to learn about Egypt and the pyramids, and knights and castles," Thomas added, "and frogs." James contributed enthusiastically, his fascination with the creatures undiminished by his near drowning. Caroline laughed, glancing at Vivian and Mason. "With such eager students, how could I refuse? If you'll have me, Mr. Reeves, I accept the position." "Excellent," Mason said, shaking her hand to seal the agreement. "We can convert the small parlor into a schoolroom. It has good light and enough space for desks." "When can you start?" Vivian asked. "I need to collect my belongings from Austin, but I could return by the end of next week," Caroline replied. "I'll send Pablo to help you transport your things," Mason offered. With the arrival of Miss Abernathy, the Double R became even more of a true home. The sound of lessons and children's laughter filled the house during the day, while evenings were often spent with everyone gathered in the sitting room, Caroline reading aloud from one of her many books while the others listened, spellbound by tales of distant lands and extraordinary adventures. Mason watched these domestic scenes with evident satisfaction, occasionally catching Vivian's eye across the room with a smile that spoke of shared happiness, and something more, a growing connection that deepened with each passing day. It was in October, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and russets, that everything changed. Mason had ridden to San Antonio with Caleb and 2 other hands to deliver cattle to Jerome Sullivan. They had been gone for 10 days, the longest Mason had been away since Vivian and the children arrived at the ranch. Vivian tried not to acknowledge how much she missed his presence, the sound of his boots on the porch in the evening, his deep laugh when the children said something amusing, the way his eyes sought hers across the dinner table. On the morning Mason was expected to return, Vivian found herself checking the road more often than necessary. The children, too, were restless with anticipation. When will Mr. Mason be home? Elizabeth asked for the 3rd time that morning as they helped Miss Abernathy decorate the schoolroom for the upcoming autumn festival. "Soon," Vivian assured her. "He said they should be back by midday." "I hope he remembers the candy he promised," Thomas said. "He said he'd bring some from the big store in San Antonio." "I'm sure he will," Miss Abernathy said, smiling at the boys' eagerness. "Mr. Reeves always keeps his promises." It was true, Vivian reflected. In the month she had known Mason Reeves, he had never once failed to keep his word. It was one of the many qualities that had endeared him to her, his reliability, his steadfastness, his unfailing kindness. Midday came and went with no sign of Mason and the others. As afternoon waned toward evening, Vivian found it increasingly difficult to hide her concern from the children. "Perhaps they were delayed," Caroline suggested as they prepared dinner. "The trails can be unpredictable." "You're right," Vivian agreed, trying to sound confident. "I'm sure they'll be here by nightfall," but darkness fell, and still there was no sign of the returning party. Vivian put the children to bed with assurances that they would wake to find Mason home, though her own certainty was wavering. She was sitting on the porch, straining to hear hoofbeats in the distance, when Caroline joined her with a shawl and a cup of tea. "You should rest," the teacher said gently, wrapping the shawl around Vivian's shoulders. "You won't help anyone by making yourself ill with worry." "I can't sleep," Vivian admitted. "Not until I know they're safe." Caroline settled beside her on the porch swing. "You love him, don't you?" The directness of the question caught Vivian off guard. It's rather obvious," Caroline said with a small smile. "To everyone except perhaps the two of you." Vivian sighed, giving up any pretense. "Yes, I love him, more than I ever thought possible. And yet you haven't told him." "How could I?" Vivian stared out into the darkness. "After everything he's done for us, how would it look if I declared such feelings? As if I were obligated or seeking to secure our position here." "You truly believe that's how he would see it?" Caroline asked. Before Vivian could respond, the distant sound of horses approaching made them both stand. Moments later, Mason and Caleb rode into the yard, their mounts moving wearily after the long journey. Vivian's heart leapt at the sight of Mason, though something in his posture sent a jolt of alarm through her. He dismounted stiffly, his movements lacking their usual fluid grace. "Mason," she called, hurrying down the porch steps. He turned at the sound of her voice, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, she could see that his face was bruised, a cut above his eyebrow partially healed. "What happened?" she gasped, reaching him just as he swayed slightly on his feet. "Bandits," he said grimly. "They hit us about 2 days' ride from here. We fought them off, but it was messy." Caleb, who appeared unharmed, elaborated as he took the reins of both horses. "6 of them jumped us in a narrow pass. Mr. Reeves took a bullet to the arm and got knocked from his horse, but he still managed to drive them off." "A bullet?" Vivian's voice rose in alarm. "Mason Reeves, why didn't you say so immediately?" "Because it's just a graze," Mason replied, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "And I didn't want to worry you. Inside." "Now," Vivian ordered, taking his uninjured arm and steering him toward the house. To Caleb she added, "Wake Pablo and have him ride for Dr. Sullivan at first light." "No need for the doctor," Mason protested, as she led him into the sitting room. "Just need to clean it properly and rest." "I'll be the judge of that," Vivian said firmly. "Sit down before you fall down." Too weary to argue further, Mason sank into an armchair. Caroline appeared with a basin of water, clean cloths, and the medicine chest from the kitchen. "I'll tend the horses," she offered, recognizing that Vivian needed privacy for what came next. Once alone with Mason, Vivian helped him remove his coat and shirt, revealing a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his upper left arm. The sight of it made her stomach clench, but she kept her expression calm as she carefully unwound the soiled linen. The wound was indeed a graze rather than a direct hit, but it was inflamed and beginning to show signs of infection. Vivian cleaned it thoroughly, despite Mason's sharp intake of breath when she applied the antiseptic. "When did this happen?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. 2 days ago, Mason admitted. "We were almost back to Austin County when they ambushed us. They were after the money from the cattle sale." "Did they get it?" Mason shook his head. "No, Caleb had the presence of mind to circle back while I kept them occupied. By the time they realized he was gone, it was too late." "So you deliberately drew their attention to yourself," Vivian concluded, her hands momentarily stilling in their work. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," Mason pointed out. "And the money is safe enough to see us through winter and make those improvements we discussed." Vivian secured a fresh bandage around his arm with more force than necessary. "The money isn't worth your life, Mason." "It wasn't about the money," he said quietly. "It was about getting home to you, to all of you." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, broke through the last of Vivian's restraint. Tears welled in her eyes as she knelt before his chair, her hands gripping his. "Don't you understand?" she whispered fiercely. "This place, everything you've built it, means nothing without you. The children need you, I need you." Mason's good hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "Vivian," he murmured, her name a caress on his lips. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, finding in them a tenderness that took her breath away. "I love you," Mason said simply. "I think I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, your chin held high despite everything. I've wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I was afraid you might feel obligated to return my feelings out of gratitude." Vivian laughed through her tears. "And I've been afraid of the same thing, that you would think I loved you only for the security you've given us." "And do you?" Mason asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. "Love me, I mean." In answer, Vivian leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: her fear when he was missing, her relief at his return, and most of all, the deep, abiding love that had grown in her heart day by day. When they finally broke apart, Mason was smiling despite the pain of his injury. "I take that as a yes." "Yes," Vivian confirmed, returning his smile through the last of her tears. "I love you, Mason Reeves, not for what you've given us, but for who you are." Mason pulled her close again, his forehead resting against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife, my partner in everything. Let's make this family we've built official." "Are you certain?" Vivian asked, needing to be sure. "The children are already mine in every way that matters," Mason finished for her. "I love them as if they were my own flesh and blood. I want to be their father in name as well as deed." Vivian's heart felt too full for her chest. "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy in Mason's eyes was worth every hardship, every fear, every moment of uncertainty that had led to this point. In his arms, Vivian had found not just safety, but a love she had never dared to dream possible. As dawn broke over the Double R Ranch, it illuminated two figures still seated together before the dying embers of the fire: a man and a woman who had found in each other the missing pieces of their hearts, and in doing so, created a family bound by love rather than blood. The news of their engagement spread quickly. The children were ecstatic. Thomas and Elizabeth understood the implications immediately, while James simply accepted that Mr. Mason would now officially be part of their family, a fact he had already assumed was true. "Does this mean we can call you Papa now?" Elizabeth asked Mason over breakfast the morning after his return. Mason glanced at Vivian, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored if you did," he told the little girl, his voice thick with emotion. "Papa," James tried out the word, then nodded with satisfaction. "I like it better than Mr. Mason." Thomas, always the most reserved of the three, approached Mason later that day as he was checking the horses in the corral. "I mean, Papa," he began hesitantly. "Will you teach me more about running the ranch, since I'll be the man of the family when you're not here?" Mason placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, recognizing the need for reassurance behind the question. "You already help more than you know, Thomas. And yes, I'll teach you everything I can. But remember, being a man isn't about being in charge. It's about taking care of those you love however they need you to." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Like you take care of us and Aunt Vivian." "Exactly like that," Mason agreed, his heart swelling with pride for this thoughtful boy who had faced so much loss yet remained open to love. Dr. Sullivan arrived that afternoon, having received Pablo's message. He examined Mason's wound, cleaned it thoroughly, and declared that with proper care, it should heal without complications. "You're a lucky man, Reeves," the doctor said as he packed up his supplies. "An inch to the right and we'd be having a different conversation." "I'm well aware of my good fortune," Mason replied, his gaze finding Vivian across the room. "So I see," Dr. Sullivan chuckled, following his gaze. "Congratulations on your engagement, by the way. The whole county will be talking about it by sundown." News traveled fast in Texas, especially when it involved one of the region's most eligible bachelors. Over the next few weeks, visitors appeared regularly at the Double R neighboring ranchers and their wives, townsfolk from Austin, even the banker who had foreclosed on Vivian's sister's property, though he received a notably cooler welcome than the others. Most came with genuine congratulations, but Vivian was not naive. She heard the whispers, saw the speculative glances. The story of how she and the children had come to the Double R was common knowledge, and not everyone viewed her rise from auction block to future ranch mistress with approval. "Pay them no mind," Mrs. Wilkins advised when she found Vivian upset after overhearing particularly cruel remarks from the banker's wife. "They're just jealous that Mason chose you over their daughters. But what if they're right?" Vivian asked, voicing the doubt that occasionally still plagued her. "What if I'm not suitable to be Mason's wife?" Mrs. Wilkins snorted derisively. "Suitable? Girl, I've known Mason Reeves since he arrived in Texas with nothing but determination and Theodore's legacy. In all that time, I've never seen him as happy as he's been since you and those children came into his life. That's all the suitability anyone needs." The wedding was set for December, when the work of the ranch slowed with the coming of winter. Vivian insisted on a simple ceremony, but Mason was equally insistent that the occasion be properly celebrated. "You deserve a real wedding," he told her. "Not just for your sake, but for the children's. They should see that this is a significant moment, the formal beginning of our family." In the end, they compromised. The ceremony would be held at the ranch rather than in town, with Reverend Patterson from Austin officiating. Only close friends and neighbors would be invited, but there would be proper decorations, music, and a feast to follow. Caroline took charge of preparing the children for their roles in the ceremony. Elizabeth would be flower girl, scattering petals from the last of the autumn, roses preserved specially for the occasion. Thomas would carry the rings, while James, too young for a formal role, would stand with Mason at the altar. As the day approached, preparations consumed the ranch. Mrs. Wilkins supervised the cleaning of every corner of the house, while Pablo and Caleb constructed an arbor where the ceremony would take place. Weather permitting, Vivian's wedding dress was her most extravagant concession to Mason's wishes. They had traveled to San Antonio together, where she was measured for a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace trim. The dressmaker had promised delivery a week before the wedding, allowing time for any necessary adjustments. "Are you nervous?" Caroline asked Vivian as they decorated the dining room with evergreen boughs and red ribbons the evening before the dress was due to arrive. "About the dress," Vivian laughed. "A little. I've never owned anything so fine." "Not about the dress," Caroline clarified. "About the wedding." "About becoming Mrs. Reeves." Vivian considered the question seriously. "Not nervous, exactly. Sometimes it still feels like a dream that I could be this fortunate after everything that happened, but when I think about actually being Mason's wife..." A smile spread across her face. "That part feels absolutely right." The dress arrived as promised, delivered by the dressmaker herself, who insisted on seeing it properly fitted. When Vivian emerged from her room wearing it, even Mrs. Wilkins, not given to sentimentality, dabbed at her eyes with her apron. "You look like an angel," Elizabeth breathed, her small face alight with wonder. "Mason won't be able to speak when he sees you," Caroline predicted, adjusting the fall of the skirt. Vivian studied her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the elegant woman who gazed back at her. The gown's simple lines suited her slender figure perfectly, while the lace at the collar and cuffs added a touch of delicacy. "You think he'll like it?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "My dear," said the dressmaker, If that man doesn't fall to his knees in gratitude when he sees you in this dress, he doesn't deserve you." The day before the wedding, a winter storm blew in from the north, bringing icy rain that ruled out the planned outdoor ceremony. Undaunted, Mason directed the rearrangement of the sitting room to accommodate the guests, while Caroline and the children festooned the interior of the house with additional decorations to make up for the change in plans. Vivian woke on her wedding day to find the world transformed. The rain had turned to snow overnight, rare in central Texas, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Sunlight sparkled off the crystalline landscape, creating a scene of such beauty that it took her breath away. "It's a good omen," Mrs. Wilkins declared when Vivian descended for breakfast. "A fresh, clean start for your new life." The children were already outside, marveling at the unfamiliar white substance. Through the window, Vivian could see Mason showing them how to make snowballs, his laughter visible in puffs of vapor in the cold air. Her heart swelled with love for this man who had not only saved them from a terrible fate, but had brought joy back into their lives. In a few hours, they would be husband and wife, legally and irrevocably bound. The thought filled her with profound happiness. The snow delayed some guests, but by noon, the house was filled with friends and neighbors. Reverend Patterson arrived looking somewhat flustered by his journey, but quickly recovered his composure when offered a cup of hot coffee. At 2 o'clock, the guests assembled in the sitting room, where the furniture had been rearranged to create an aisle leading to the fireplace. Mason stood there with James beside him, both wearing new suits tailored for the occasion. Thomas stood nearby, holding a small pillow with the ring's plain gold bands that Mason had commissioned from a jeweler in San Antonio. From her vantage point in the hallway, Vivian could see the expectant faces of their guests, the festive decorations adorning every surface, and most of all, Mason's profile as he waited for her. In that moment, the journey that had brought them to this point from desperation to hope, from uncertainty to love, seemed both miraculous and inevitable. The musicians, a fiddler and a guitarist from a neighboring ranch, began to play. Elizabeth proceeded down the aisle first, scattering rose petals with solemn concentration. Then Caroline, serving as Vivian's attendant, walked slowly to take her place opposite Thomas. When it was Vivian's turn, she took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway. A collective murmur of appreciation rose from the guests, but Vivian was aware of only one reaction: Mason's. As he turned to see her, his expression transformed with such naked adoration that she almost faltered. Mrs. Wilkins, who had insisted on the honor of escorting Vivian in place of a father, squeezed her arm reassuringly. "Steady now," she whispered. "Your future is waiting." The walk to Mason's side seemed both endless and too brief. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "You are so beautiful," he murmured, too low for anyone but her to hear. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Vivian heard the familiar words as if from a distance, her attention focused on the warmth of Mason's hands holding hers, the love shining in his eyes, the incredible reality that this man, this good, honorable, loving man, was choosing her as his wife. When the time came for their vows, Mason spoke with unwavering certainty. "I, Mason Reeves, take you, Vivian Foster, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you, in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." He smiled, adding words that were not part of the traditional vows. "You and these children are the family I never dared hope for. I will protect you with my life and love you with all my heart until my dying day." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes as she repeated her own vows, her voice gaining strength with each word of commitment. When she finished, Thomas stepped forward with the rings. Mason placed one on Vivian's finger, and she did the same for him, the simple bands symbolizing their unending bond. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Patterson proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Mason cupped Vivian's face gently in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several guests dabbed at their eyes. When they turned to face their friends and family, James launched himself at them, wrapping his arms around their legs. Thomas and Elizabeth quickly joined the embrace, creating a family tableau that brought fresh tears to many eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Patterson announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Reeves and family." The celebration that followed was everything Mason had hoped for: joyous, warm, and filled with music, good food, and laughter. As evening fell, lanterns illuminated the yard where, despite the snow, some guests danced to the fiddler's lively tunes. Inside, Mason found Vivian watching the dancers through the window, a contented smile on her face. He slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "Happy, Mrs. Reeves?" he asked, still savoring the sound of her new name. "More than I can express," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I think the children might be even happier. Elizabeth told me she's been praying for this day since we arrived at the Double R." Mason chuckled. "Smart girl. She saw what I felt before I found the courage to speak it." "We've come a long way from that auction block in Austin," Vivian mused. "Sometimes I still can't believe how our lives have changed." "I knew the moment I saw you that you were meant to be here," Mason said. "Not as a servant or employee, but as the heart of this home. It just took time for you to see it too." Vivian turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for saving us that day, but for everything since, for loving the children as your own, for your patience, for making me believe in second chances." Mason kissed her softly. "Our story is just beginning, Vivian. The best chapters are yet to be written." As the last guests departed and the children were tucked into bed, Mason led Vivian to the master bedroom, their bedroom now. A fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the space that they would share for the rest of their lives. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," Mason said, closing the door behind them. In the privacy of their room, they came together as husband and wife, their passion tempered by tenderness, their bodies expressing what words could not fully convey: the depth of their love, the joy of their union, the promise of their future together. Later, as Vivian lay in Mason's arms watching the firelight dance across the ceiling, she felt a sense of completion that had eluded her all her life. From orphaned child to desperate aunt to beloved wife, her journey had been marked by both tragedy and triumph. But here, in this moment, with Mason's steady heartbeat beneath her cheek and the knowledge that their children slept peacefully down the hall, Vivian knew she had found her true home. "What are you thinking?" Mason murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," Vivian replied. "With you, with our family." Mason tightened his embrace. "Always," he promised. "Always." Spring came early to the Double R Ranch that year, as if nature itself celebrated the new beginning the Reeves family had found. The wildflowers bloomed with exceptional vibrancy, carpeting the hills in blues, reds, and golds. The cattle thrived, with more calves than expected surviving the mild winter. Even the kitchen garden yielded its first harvest weeks ahead of schedule. "It's a blessed year, Mrs. Wilkins declared as she helped Vivian preserve the bounty of early strawberries. "Mark my words." Vivian couldn't disagree. The months since her wedding had been the happiest of her life. Mason was a devoted husband whose love and respect for her only deepened with time. The children flourished under the stability and affection of their new family structure, with Thomas showing a natural aptitude for ranching, Elizabeth developing her mother's talent for music, and James revealing a surprising gift for arithmetic under Caroline's tutelage. The double R itself prospered, with Mason implementing the improvements they had planned the previous autumn. New fencing extended the north pasture, a second windmill increased the water supply, and a small orchard of apple and peach trees was planted near the house. But the greatest joy came in April, when Vivian confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. Mason's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the bedroom before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned about her condition. "Are you sure we shouldn't send for Dr. Sullivan?" he asked for the third time that evening as they sat on the porch swing after the children were asleep. Vivian laughed, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. "I'm perfectly healthy, Mason. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time without keeping doctors at their bedsides for 9 months. Not my wife," Mason said stubbornly. "Not carrying my child." His protectiveness was endearing, if occasionally overwhelming. As her pregnancy progressed, Mason insisted on hiring additional help for the household, despite Vivian's protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her duties. "Rosa will assist with the heavier work," Mason declared when he introduced the young Mexican woman he had hired. "And before you argue, I've already promised her father she'll be treated as family, not a servant." True to his word, Rosa was quickly integrated into the household, her cheerful nature and excellent cooking making her a welcome addition. She proved especially helpful when Vivian's morning sickness extended well into the afternoon during her second month. The children's reaction to the news of the baby varied. Elizabeth was thrilled at the prospect of a new sibling, immediately offering to help with the baby's care. Thomas accepted the development with his usual thoughtfulness, asking practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether it would affect their lessons with Miss Abernathy. James, however, was uncertain. "Will you still love me when the new baby comes?" he asked Vivian one evening as she tucked him into bed. Vivian gathered him close, her heart aching at the insecurity in his voice. "Oh, James, of course we will. Love isn't like a pie with only so many slices to go around. It grows to include everyone who needs it." "Papa says the same thing," James confided. "He says his heart got bigger when he met us, and it will get even bigger for the new baby." "Papa is a very wise man," Vivian said, kissing his forehead. "And he loves you very, very much just as I do." By midsummer, Vivian's condition was visible to all, her rounded belly a source of pride for Mason and fascination for the children. The baby was active, kicking vigorously whenever Mason spoke or placed his hand on Vivian's stomach. "Already responding to your father's voice," Vivian teased as they lay in bed one night, the baby performing what felt like acrobatics beneath her ribs. "I think we have another cowboy in the making." "Or cowgirl," Mason countered, his hand warm against her skin. "Either way, this child will be loved beyond measure." As autumn approached, preparations for the baby's arrival intensified. Mason converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, furnishing it with a cradle he crafted himself, and a rocking chair brought all the way from San Antonio. Mrs. Wilkins and Rosa sewed tiny garments, while Caroline helped the children create a quilt of colorful squares, each one representing a member of their family. On a crisp October morning, just as the sun was rising over the eastern hills, Vivian's labor began. Mason sent Pablo racing for Dr. Sullivan and Mrs. Bradley, the midwife from Austin, while Caroline took charge of keeping the children occupied and away from the birthing room. The labor was long but uncomplicated. With Mrs. Bradley's expert guidance, Mason's unwavering support, and her own determination, Vivian brought their son into the world just as the sun was setting. "He's perfect," Mason whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Vivian, he's absolutely perfect." The baby was indeed beautiful, a sturdy boy with a thatch of dark hair and eyes that, when briefly opened, revealed hints of his father's blue. They named him William Theodore Reeves, honoring both Vivian's father and the man who had given Mason his second chance. When the children were allowed to meet their new brother the following morning, their reactions cemented the family bond even further. Elizabeth cooed and fussed, immediately assuming the role of little mother. Thomas observed quietly before declaring that he would teach William to ride as soon as he was old enough. And James, after a moment's hesitation, gently touched the baby's tiny hand, breaking into a delighted smile when William's fingers curled reflexively around his own. "He likes me," James exclaimed. "Can I hold him, Papa?" Seated carefully in the armchair with Mason's support, James cradled his baby brother with surprising gentleness. "Hello, William," he said solemnly. "I'm your big brother James. I'm going to teach you all about frogs." The moment captured the essence of what the Double R had become: not just a successful ranch, but a true family bound by love that transcended blood relations. As William grew from infant to toddler, the harmony of their family life only deepened. The older children treated him as their own, teaching him to walk, sharing their toys, and including him in their games as soon as he was able to participate. Mason proved to be as devoted a father to his biological son as he was to his adopted children, showing no preference or distinction in his affections. If anything, William's arrival seemed to strengthen the bonds between Mason and the older children, as they shared in the joy and challenges of raising the energetic boy. By William's second birthday, the Double R had expanded further. Mason had purchased additional acreage adjoining the original property, nearly doubling the size of the ranch. A proper schoolhouse had been built halfway between the ranch and the nearest neighbor's property, allowing Caroline to teach not only the Reeves children, but also those from surrounding ranches. Life was good, better than Vivian had ever dared to imagine during those dark days in Austin. Yet the memory of that auction block, of the fear and uncertainty she had felt with 3 small children depending on her, never entirely faded. It was that memory that prompted her decision on the 5th anniversary of their arrival at the Double R. After discussing it with Mason, who supported her completely, Vivian wrote to an orphanage in Austin, offering to provide a home for 2 sisters who had recently lost their parents to typhoid. "Are you certain?" Mason asked as they sealed the letter. "William is still young, and another baby may join us before long." He glanced meaningfully at Vivian's midsection, where early signs suggested their family would indeed be growing again. "I've never been more certain," Vivian replied. "Those girls need what we can give them, not just shelter and education, but love and belonging, just as Thomas, Elizabeth, and James needed it 5 years ago." Mason kissed her tenderly. "This is why I love you, Vivian Reeves. Your heart has room for everyone who needs it." A week later, Mason traveled to Austin to bring home 9-year-old Margaret and 7-year-old Ruth Harris. The girls were thin and solemn-faced when they arrived at the ranch, their few possessions tied in small bundles, their eyes wary with the caution of children who had learned that security could be fleeting. But they were met by a welcome committee, unlike any they had expected. Not just Mason and Vivian, but Thomas, Elizabeth, James, and William, all waiting on the porch with handmade signs proclaiming "Welcome home" in childish handwriting. "These are your new brothers and sister," Vivian explained gently, kneeling before the girls despite her growing belly. "And we're so happy you've come to be part of our family." "For how long?" Margaret asked, her young face serious beyond her years. "For always," Mason answered, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." It took time for the girls to believe in the permanence of their new situation, to trust that they wouldn't be sent away when they made mistakes or asked for too much. But the patient love of the Reeves family gradually broke through their defenses. Elizabeth took a special interest in Ruth, who shared her love of music. Thomas appointed himself Margaret's protector at the small school, making sure the other children welcomed her. Even little William contributed in his way, his uncomplicated affection drawing smiles from both girls when adult reassurances failed. By Christmas, the transformation was remarkable. Margaret and Ruth had gained weight and color, their eyes now bright with the security of knowing they were truly home. When they called Vivian and Mason Mama and Papa for the first time during the holiday celebrations, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. As the Reeves family gathered around the piano for carols that Christmas Eve, Vivian caught Mason's eye across the room. In his gaze, she saw the same wonder she felt that, from the tragedy and injustice of that auction block in Austin, such happiness could have grown. Their silent communication was interrupted by William's insistent tugging on Mason's pant leg. "Papa's story," the toddler demanded, holding up his favorite picture book. "Which one, son?" Mason asked, lifting him onto his lap. "The one about the cowboy and the lady," William replied, snuggling into his father's embrace. Vivian smiled, knowing which story he meant. It was a tale Mason had created for the children, a simplified version of how he and Vivian had met, with the harsher details softened for young ears, but the essential truth preserved. That family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that love could transform lives when given freely. As Mason began the familiar story, the other children gathered around, even Thomas and Margaret, who considered themselves too grown for bedtime tales but never tired of this particular narrative. "Once upon a time," Mason began, his deep voice filling the cozy sitting room, "there was a cowboy who had everything a man could want: land, cattle, a fine house, but his heart was lonely because he had no family to share it with." Vivian rested her hand on her rounded belly, feeling their newest child move within her as she listened to the story of their beginning. From auction block to altar, from desperation to joy, their journey had been extraordinary. But the true miracle, she reflected, was not in the dramatic rescue or the reversal of fortune, but in the everyday love that had built this family, a love that had room for each new heart that joined their circle. As the years passed, the Double R Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in Central Texas. Under Mason and Vivian's stewardship, it grew to encompass over 10,000 acres, supporting not just cattle but also horses, crops, and eventually, an experimental agricultural program in partnership with the newly established Agricultural College in College Station. The Reeves children grew up strong, educated, and secure in the knowledge that they were cherished, regardless of how they had come to be part of the family. Thomas, the oldest, followed in Mason's footsteps, developing a keen understanding of ranch management while studying innovative breeding techniques that improved their stock. Elizabeth discovered a talent for teaching, eventually taking over from Caroline Abernathy when the latter married a rancher from a neighboring property. James, true to his early interests, became fascinated with natural sciences, and was the first of the children to attend university, returning to the Double R with knowledge that helped establish their agricultural experiments. William, though biologically Mason and Vivian's first child, never knew a time when Thomas, Elizabeth, and James weren't his beloved older siblings. He grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's business acumen and his mother's compassionate spirit. Margaret and Ruth Harris, the orphaned sisters who joined the family later, blossomed under the Reeves' care. Margaret's artistic talents were encouraged, leading to studies in San Antonio and eventually a career as an illustrator for a publishing house in Austin. Ruth's musical abilities developed into a passion for composition, her pieces performed in churches and gatherings throughout the county. The family continued to grow, with Mason and Vivian welcoming another daughter, Charlotte, and a second son, Robert, in the years following William's birth. The ranch house expanded accordingly, with new wings added to accommodate the growing family and the frequent visitors drawn to the warmth and hospitality of the Double R. But perhaps the greatest testament to Mason and Vivian's legacy was not in the prosperity of the ranch or even the achievements of their children, but in the tradition they established of offering second chances to those in need. Over the decades, the Double R became known as a place where orphan children, widowed women, and men down on their luck could find not just employment, but a fresh start. Some stayed briefly, gaining skills and confidence before moving on to independent lives. Others, like Pablo and Rosa, became permanent fixtures, their own children growing up alongside the Reeves' children and eventually intermarrying, creating an extended family that defied conventional boundaries of blood and origin. On warm summer evenings, when the work of the day was done, Mason and Vivian often sat on the porch swing that had witnessed so many important conversations throughout their marriage. As they watched their grandchildren playing in the yard, a joyful mix of biological descendants, and those who had come to them through other paths, they marveled at the fullness of the life they had built together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Vivian asked on one such evening, her hand resting in Mason's as it had for over 30 years. Though silver now threaded through her dark hair and lines of laughter marked her face, to Mason she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. "Not in my wildest dreams," Mason admitted, looking out over their domain. "When I bid for you and the children that day, I hoped to offer you safety and a decent life. I never imagined how completely you would transform mine." Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture familiar from countless shared moments. "I was so afraid," she confessed, "not just of what might happen to us, but later of allowing myself to believe in the future you offered. It seemed too good to be true." "And now?" Mason asked, kissing the top of her head. "Now I know that some things, no matter how unlikely, are simply meant to be." Vivian smiled as their youngest grandchild toddled toward them, arms outstretched for a cuddle. "We were meant to be a family, Mason. All of us, in all the different ways we came together." As the sun set over the Double R Ranch, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that had greeted them on their wedding day so many years before, Mason and Vivian Reeves held hands and watched their legacy unfold before them, a legacy not of land or wealth, but of love that had the power to heal, to transform, and to create family from the most unlikely beginnings. From auction block to homestead, from strangers to beloved family, their journey had been remarkable. But as they often told their children and grandchildren when recounting the story of their beginning, the true miracle was not in the dramatic moments, but in the everyday choice to love, a choice they had made on that fateful day in Austin, and every day since. And in that choice, they had found not just redemption from past sorrows, but a joy beyond measure, the profound happiness of a family built on compassion, strengthened by adversity, and bound together by love that transcended blood, circumstance, and even time itself.